Roundtable. My name is Danielle Stobie, and I am the Arts Education Manager with ArtsFairfax. Please double check that your microphone is muted, and if you have any questions, please include them in the chat. At this time, please also rename yourself with your name and organization. You'll see in the chat that there is a document with biographies on our 5 advisory group members who will be helping to facilitate our breakout rooms, along with a short bio with our moderator, who will have a short presentation. All right. Let me stop sharing my screen for a second. Okay. So we're going to start things off as people are kind of coming in and renaming themselves. And I'm going to start things off with a poll just to kind of get to know everyone who's in the room. So I'm going to open this up. And you should see when I launch this, there's going to be a couple of questions. And I'm going to give everyone just a couple of minutes to go through and answer both of these polls. All right, it's starting to go. I'm seeing some good responses. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds. Just want to give everybody a chance as we're getting more people coming in. Okay. All right, so I'm going to share these results with everybody. All right, so it looks like we've got a lot of administrator leadership, artistic leadership, some board members. We've got a lot of other, so we'll kind of discover especially in our breakout room session, who we have. And then, a lot of performing arts, visual arts, education. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Okay. So now that we've kind of gotten a chance to see everyone who's in the room, I'm going to hand it over to our president and CEO, Linda Sullivan.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got, I think, a wonderful program, and you'll be hearing about a lot more in terms of our upcoming workshops. Just so that everybody, just to reiterate that we are, ArtsFairfax is the local arts agency for Fairfax County. We are a 501c3, but we distribute county funds to the arts, and we provide a lot of other services such as information, education, artist residencies, and working with various civic organizations to make sure that the arts are accessible to the community. Our role has never been in sharper focus than the past year. Obviously, with the pandemic and the shutdown of 98% of our arts organizations, getting our funding out has been critical, and the staff pulled that together and pivoted and got out all of our money for the year immediately, and through general operating grants and emergency relief grants. And then we raised money, private money, to give out as artist grants. And of course, we've been getting more information out, trying to stay on top of all the opportunities that are out there for the artists and arts organizations in the community. So it's been a busy and challenging year for all of us. And we know that the arts are going to be really critical to recovery. And so we're very concerned that we continue to find more support for the arts, that we continue to communicate with you and lead you to resources. We want to make sure that when we're able to come back, that the arts are there and strong to help, build back our communities and community engagement. And we want to see everybody survive. And we want to make sure that, the arts are there to be accessed and to be participated in by everyone. So we are looking through that lens as we move forward. And I want to thank Danielle and Lisa for, putting together a terrific program. I want to thank our advisory committee for advising us in terms of the programs you're going to hear about. And I thank you all for hanging in there and being with us today. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. So I'm now going to take a second. We're going to watch this video. It's a wonderful original poem called Spaces. Hold on. I want to make sure it's going to work with the audio. Okay. Okay, here we go.
You want to hear Spaces? Do we have time?
Let's close it out with Spaces.
Okay.
We've got time for Spaces.
Okay, quickly.
Give it up for Hannah.
It is difficult to stand in spaces that weren't designed for me, spaces that were not created for people that look like me, spaces that scream, "You do not belong here." Spaces that feel like sandpaper against my blackness, coarse and rough and painful and uneasy. Spaces that are void of signs, but still I can see them hanging in a not so distant memory. Signs that separated water fountains and restaurants, blatantly reminding people that these spaces were not made for them. And although the signs no longer remain, the architecture and atmosphere is constructed in such a way that I know and we know that these are not our spaces. We are simply standing in borrowed time to entertain the master's masses. It is difficult to stand in these spaces and be me, fully me. Code switching my vernacular to make you feel comfortable. Why must my life dress itself up in discomfort for you to feel at ease? Why must my hair look a certain way in these spaces? Why is my gender an issue in these spaces? Why does my skin feel so heavy in these spaces? You see, these are spaces I no longer want to reside in. I do not enjoy being in these spaces. I no longer want to subject myself to these spaces, but then I am reminded as I stand in these spaces and I see the faces of these two little black girls watching me perform in awe, because I am a woman with kinky hair like them and skin that looks like theirs and lips that look like theirs, standing in these spaces. Spaces that have been designed in ways that have spoken to them at an early age, reminding them, baby, some spaces just ain't for your kind. You see, that is why I'm in these spaces, being a shout in these spaces. It is for every black person that has ever entered a room and wondered, would anyone look like them in these spaces? It is for every woman that has stood at the head of a boardroom table wondering, would she be considered equal in these spaces? It is for every LGBTQ person that has wondered, could they safely be themselves in these spaces? It is for every Muslim woman that has wondered, could she wear her hijab in these spaces? You see, I remember those that stood in spaces not made for them, that marched on roads not paved for them, that sat down on seats in buses not earmarked for them, that sat down at counters and endured the humiliation of sitting in spaces so that one day I too could stand in these spaces. You see, that is why I'm in these spaces. It is for everyone that came before me, that sipped water at the colored only fountain, that marched into integrated schools and knew they would be just one of 9. It is for every Black performer that stood on stages so that one day little Black kids could know that they too could stand on these stages. It is for my mother that stood in the space of a cotton field picking cotton for 80 cents a day. It is for everyone that will come after me, for them to know that they have a right to be in these spaces, to have a seat at the table, in these spaces, to have a voice, in these spaces, to have influence, in these spaces. You see, that is why I stand in these spaces even when it makes me uncomfortable. And now some of you sit looking at me, and now you feel uncomfortable. But today you have heard me. You cannot unsee me. In this space, I belong. In this space, we are here, and we belong here in this space. Thank you.
Woo!
Thank you all so much.
All right. So thank you. Sorry, I'm getting everything kind of set back up. So again, that was an original poem called Spaces by Hannah Drake. And I think it kind of sets up where we want to be starting from today. So I have up here an overview of some of the goals that we hope to accomplish with this upcoming series of workshops. Some of the goals we have are to build capacity of arts organization and artists, to engage people in arts and culture by increasing knowledge and understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And how are we going to do this? So we hope that some of the takeaways from these workshops will be providing resources and expertise geared to the unique challenges and opportunities of Fairfax County, provide practical tools to advance DEIA and Fairfax through the arts, learn together and from each other, and in the process build new relationships. And then we also hope to model best practices of DEIA. So we look forward to hearing from you in the breakout rooms and about how this relates to your organization. And to start things off, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Bria Heidelberg. So Bria is an arts management educator, consultant, and researcher focusing on the intersection of the arts and other fields of study. She serves as an associate professor and program director at Drexel University. She also founded ISO Arts Consulting, which focuses on human resources issues in the nonprofit arts, particularly issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is well and warm if you're in one of the places where the weather got a little rude the last couple of days. So I am in Philadelphia, and I am here to chat with you today to sort of provide an overview of some of the topics that you're hopefully going to delve deeper into as part of the Work Smart program, and to help you all get to know each other a little bit. For those of you that don't, that deeper engagement will happen in the breakout rooms, but we're going to have a bit of a dialogue here starting off. So if I could have the first poll put up. Great.
Sorry, just give me a second.
That's okay.
Okay, there we go.
Great. So to start us off, I want to know what your organization is currently doing to address racial and social inequity. And, you know, you might be doing a lot. It might seem like your organization is about to get started. So I just want to get a sense of where everyone is at within their organizations.
I'm going to give it another few seconds. I'm seeing more come in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share these results.
Yeah, so I see a lot of folks are having preliminary discussions, and I'll talk a little bit about what that may mean for you and your organization in just a second. I see a good number of people are in the process of crafting an equity statement, making commitments to hire some more diverse staff. And so you might be doing a couple of these things all at once too. So, keep that in mind. I know you were pushed into picking a thing, but it sounds like a lot of people are at the beginning or maybe the initial phases of their racial and social equity journeys within their organization. So awesome. It sounds like you're in the right space. So I'm going to give you a couple of like overview smatterings. I decided to not PowerPoint you today, but what I will do is I'm going to put into the chat some of the key terms that I'm going to touch upon, so that, and I'll put it in a couple of times too. That way you have access to it. So first things first, diversity, equity, inclusion, access, not all the same things. There are many different variations of definitions floating around. For those of you that want a little something in your back pocket, diversity, the bare bones definition is just there are different types of people in these spaces. I think that poem was a really great way to sort of encapsulate what it is that we're going to chat about today. So thinking of there being different types of people. Equity is about power. Equity is about the ability to have some autonomy in the way and full engagement in the way that decisions are made. Inclusivity is really about making sure that people have some agency and voice, right? And so in order to have any of that come together, you need to have access to the systems that are currently in place. So there are systems, just organizations by themselves. There are subsystems where people get access to power and resources and who gets to make decisions. So sometimes people say DEI or DEIA the same way that my toddler says LMNO, where he doesn't fully understand that they're separate letters just yet. He knows that it is a thing that is important to the overall context of the alphabet. But it's important to remember as we're spouting all those letters together that they do mean individual things. And especially since some of you are having preliminary discussions, it's important to recognize that these are stepping stones in many cases to one another. So thinking about providing access to a system so that you can have a diverse organization. And then once you have a diverse organization, thinking about ways to make sure that everybody that's invited into the space feels included and given, some autonomy and given some agency to move towards creating a fully equitable organization, right? I think a lot of people get discouraged when they realize that you can't do them all at once. So just as a heads up, those are separate letters, and they might require, and in many cases they do, require different ways of altering your organization or your thinking or the people within your organization to achieve each of those various levels, letters. So as was mentioned in the intro, I am a professor by trade in the day job bits. So I'm telling you some things, but I'm also really interested in hearing things from you all as well. So the other thing that I wanted to ask are, what are some things that excite you about this work, or that you're maybe interested in doing when it comes to equity work as far as getting started? And that is something that you can throw in the chat, but I think we also have a poll that's designed to address that question. So I tend to be multimodal as much as possible. So yeah, you can go ahead and put your response into the poll. So the poll that's showing up now is the barriers. So we can talk about those first. So feel free to flesh out those barriers in the chat, in addition to, responding to the limited options of things that came out for the options that are there for the poll. Yeah, I didn't put all of the above there. That's on me. Bad researcher. Okay, so I see capacity. We are doing a lot. I feel like we're doing 3 times as much during the pandemic as far as keeping our organizations running and engaged and reaching out to people when we don't actually have the physical capacity to engage in person. Some people are struggling with some lack of buy-in amongst various levels of staff, lack of knowledge or expertise, which is what the Work Smart program is going to be about, to help get you up and running as far as the knowledge base goes, to know what you do know and what you need to learn, because that's a really important part of this work, and fear or aversion to getting started. There's also in the chat a response about finding the diversity to add to your organization and engaging with them. So a lot of this brings me to some foundational things, or things that I've come to see or understand when it comes to institutional inequity and structural inequities, is that sometimes there have been so many barriers put in place towards diversity that even when you on the organizational side become aware of something or some things, a couple of things that may have limited, or purposefully or not, limited the diversification of your organization in the past, and you work to remove those barriers, there are sometimes barriers that you aren't aware of from the person side that is preventing them from making their way to you, as far as finding people that want to engage with your organization to help you towards that goal of diversifying. So part of the Work Smart program will help you be able to identify both institutional and structural inequities. And, you know, when I think about public service, or I think about community-based organizations, whether they be arts specific or not, when I think about structural and institutional inequities, I'm thinking about access to general education that would prompt you to having specialized types of education or engagement with something like the arts. I think about the ways in which we champion or sort of highlight particular types of arts and cultural practices over others that might limit people's thinking about the kinds of artistic opportunities that exist, that might be meaningful to them. So your organization might be offering some great stuff, but if the only messages that people are receiving in their everyday lives are the high arts, and if they aren't going to become Picasso or become an opera singer, then, you know, maybe there's not space for their type of cultural practice or engagement. Those are barriers that are going to prevent them from even finding you in the first place, regardless of all the amazing things that your organization is doing. So part of the Work Smart program is going to be to help you identify, name, and begin to dismantle some of these barriers that exist both within your that may exist within your organizations, but also outside of your organizations. Right? One thing that was in the poll was lack of buy-in. So there's a whole spectrum of research related to diversity resistance. Is one of the things that well, not enjoy. It's one of the things that I look into as a researcher. So there's a whole spectrum of ways in which people might not be ready to engage in the ideas of and the practices of becoming a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization that provides access to everyone within the community. And that ranges from, you know, I hate people that don't look and think like me, all the way to I like the idea of diversity, equity, inclusion in theory, right? I believe these things. I can sort of say the language. I can speak wokeness, if you will. But when it comes time to actually doing the thing, then there's some resistance or some reticence or some I don't really have the capacity to put in the actual work. So that's something that, you know, I encourage you all to begin to notice both in yourselves and within your organizations when it comes to thinking about how you are best equipped to engage in this type of work. To focus and help. Okay, so there's some requests for services and suggestions for local facilitators. I do believe that as part of, and one of the reasons why this is such a great opportunity for everyone is that these engagement opportunities are cross sectoral, so that you can get the kind of resources and information from people that may have already engaged local facilitators or done some of this work, or made the inevitable missteps that sometimes that come along with this work as you work towards becoming a learning organization. So what kinds of diversity resistance have people experienced in their organizations, if you have? I know at least 23% of you have, according to the poll.
I can go ahead. This is Lindsay Martin from Chairman McKay's office with Fairfax County. You know, we added a chief equity officer who I believe is also on this call, Carla Bruce. We added that position in 2017. But it has been, you know, a process in getting buy-in from such a, you know, our organization is 12,000 plus employees. And so I think a lot of that is a lot of groundwork and doing the education and buy-in to really have our culture reflected. And so I don't think it's necessarily on the whole coming from a place of resistance. Although, you know, there's always those individuals who are going to be resistant. I think it's really just a matter of educating and people finding the reason for very intentional actions to be more inclusive, and not just saying, well, these are open to everybody. And if it just happens to not be, you know, diverse, then what can we do about it? I think it's a lot of education on, you know, leadership to make sure that, you know, the community as a whole knows why we're taking these very specific actions to include people who have been historically excluded from, you know, not only the arts, but, you know, our social structures as a whole.
Yeah, so, and that gets up to the ideas of institutional and structural inequity, right? So if we're thinking about a funding institution, for example, a lot of people mistakenly assume that things like, you know, grant requirements or bylaws are neutral because they're typed on a piece of paper. We tend to think if it's not a human specifically being a thing, that there's the promise of objectivity or neutrality. But things, organizations, structures are created by people. People have biases, and therefore there are biases and inequities in the things that we have created. I just had a conversation yesterday with somebody about you know, there was a grant opportunity that I served as a panelist on for organizations that are fully engaging in and doing meaningful work around DEI at the intersection of that and the arts. And the budget threshold was $250,000. And I was just like, so let's talk about that, because the budgeting threshold, the general operating budgeting threshold, tells me that you're only interested in a certain type of institution. What kind of institution? An institution that is probably predominantly white because it has that kind. So there's proxy things that we include in requirements and in bylaws that aren't specifically saying I want the hegemonic norm, but that in practice means that's what you're saying, right? You're excluding organizations that have been historically marginalized from big donor bases, from other granting opportunities, from operational funding that would help them achieve a $250,000 budget. So while you're not saying I don't want to include small and mid-sized BIPOC-led organizations in that $250,000 threshold, you've said all of that and a lot more, right? So the some other things that I've seen are, you know, fear about tokenism, which gets to the idea of intersectionality, right? So when we think, all right, we need to diversify our board, let's find one person that has the same educational background, vernacular and speech structure, socioeconomic status, you know, communication style, conflict management style, that has a tan. and then we've covered it. Or, you know, that ticks all the boxes of sameness for our board or for our staff, except they might have a different gender identity or expression, right? So that 1 degree of difference, and considering it a job well done and patting yourselves on the back is where you start to get into that idea of tokenism. So it's really important as you're beginning this work to do whatever sort of pre-work that your organization has the capacity to do, whether that's a privilege walk, unpacking your backpack, but you need to take stock of who's at the table, fully take stock of who's at the table, not just looking around and saying, oh, we're all white, or looking around and saying, you know, we all identify as women, or as, you know, heterosexual individuals, right? But taking a full stock of everybody's spectrum of identity so that you can notice where there are gaps and where the gaps are deep and where the gaps are shallow, so that you can ask fully formed people and not just one element of their identity to join your organization or your board, right? So some other things that I've saw as response to some barriers are fear of getting in trouble, fear of or not understanding that the organization needs to fundamentally change, which gets to another bit in the key terms that I mentioned, which is organizational culture. So people tend to not understand that your organization's culture, which is the ways in which you communicate, the artifacts, your website, your bylaws, do you talk to each other on the phone? Do you use Teams or Slack? Or do you, in the before times, just walk by somebody's office and chat with them? All of those are elements of organizational culture. Organizational culture will eat your cultural equity statement, your DEI hire. It will eat all of that for lunch if you do not address your organizational culture. Organizational culture is actually stronger than the people that originally created it. So there are folks that start off with an assumption that, oh, I'm bringing in a new executive director, or I'm bringing in a new board, or you know, I've changed over some staff members, and so we can start fresh with equity work. That's not necessarily the case unless you've diagnosed what your organizational culture is, what it says about you, how others in the community perceive your organization and its culture, because that might be the big barrier between you and the type of people that you would like to serve, or fully reflecting those in your community. I've seen executive directors and board chairs pushed out by entry and mid-level staff because their organizational culture was stronger than the presumed authority of somebody with a higher, you know, higher in quotes, title. So organizational culture is an integral part of equity work and understanding how your organization operates. So some other things to think about, purposeful ownership. So when you think about your organizational culture, what's your organization's history, right? How have they treated those that you're trying to invite into the organization now in the past? And taking purposeful ownership, as even if you're new leadership, even if you had nothing to do with those past problematic practices, taking purposeful ownership to engage with those communities and provide restorative action so that you can move forward together. I see a lot of organizations run into the issue of having strategic amnesia, where they're just like, oh, I'm sorry, you were marginalized. How? Well, that wasn't me personally. And so now we're just going to pretend that I don't know what you're talking about. And, you know, please feel free to come into our organization now. We're diverse and equitable and inclusive, right? So, you know, that strategic amnesia will get you every time. If you have put out calls and nobody that from the community that represents the community is applying, if you have, as a consultant and as a researcher, I look at the 3, 6, 9 month mark for turnover. If you do invite somebody that doesn't, that hasn't traditionally been invited in your space into the organization, if they're leaving by the 12-month mark, you've got some work to do as far as your organizational culture and your inclusivity goes. So those are some flags to be thinking about, especially as you move towards you know, purposeful action from your initial conversations and your equity statement towards internal transformation, and then external engagement. A lot of people want to invite folks into their organization without cleaning their house first, right? You don't invite guests over without at least spraying some Febreze and fluffing up the pillows on the couch, right? And same thing goes for equity work. So internal work first, folks. So that is my bit about all of the important things that I wanted everybody to sort of keep in mind. Some terminology that you're going to hear again and again and again, hopefully in these Work Smart sessions. And because we had a whole bunch of chat stuff, I'm going to put those key terms in there again. It really helps, and you're going to get this in your first session of the Work Smart stuff, I believe. It really helps if we have a shared language so that people can ask questions of each other and seek resources and have meaningful engagement across organizations, across the sectors within your community. If we're all using shared language, it really helps to make some collective action. So you're going to pop into your, strategic amnesia just means, you sort of know what has happened to the communities that have been traditionally marginalized with regard to their engagement with your organization, but you're going to pretend like that's not really a thing and not provide restorative justice and restorative making amends. Like you failed to make amends and you just want to build a new house on old bones, essentially. So that's what strategic amnesia is. So I want to make sure that you have enough time in your breakout rooms to really get into some deep engagement. So I am going to end my comments there. The other thing that I will do, and you'll have access to this, is to put my email in the chat in case there are additional questions. Let me make sure I'm typing that right because my contacts have died on me. They're a little dry. So yeah, feel free to reach out via email.
Great. Thank you so much, Bria. So we're now going to move into some breakout rooms. This is always a fun adventure. So I've tried ahead of time to kind of put people out, kind of pre-registered. I expect that not everyone is going to automatically go into a room. Yeah, I can already see that we've got some people that will go automatically in, and I think there's going to be quite a few who are left outside of a room. So what I'm going to ask is that when I open the rooms, if you are not automatically put into a room, you will have the option to choose the room that you would like to go into. Each of the rooms are labeled, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're each being led by one of our advisory group members. So all the conversations are going to be the same. We're just trying to evenly distribute the groups. So I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. And like I said, if you're having trouble entering a room, I can help. You can put that information in the chat. Have just about everybody back. So as we're wrapping things up, I'd like for everyone to, if you'd like to, type one word describing the session, breakout session, something you took away from our main session in the chat. I'm going to be sharing my screen again and just sharing what's next. So these are some of our upcoming workshops. It's kind of a sneak peek to some of our series content and projected dates. We're still in the process of confirming some of our topics and dates, but I wanted to get everybody a sense of where we're at now, and I'll be providing further communication as we, get those dates set. I also want to take a second to thank our sponsors for the Work Smart series, the Arts Forward Fund, National Endowment for the Arts, Reston Community Center, and the Virginia Commission for the Arts. We appreciate and thank our advisory group for leading our breakout sessions, our moderator, and to all of you for participating in this kickoff to our series. We appreciate your honest and candid conversations, and we look forward to seeing everyone in the next workshop. And I want to close out before I end by sharing some of what has been shared in the chat. So we have hopeful, honest, collaborative, informative, energetic, inspiring, thoughtful, connection, supportive, sharing, collaborative, wonderful group, connections, good start, excitement, wonderful, and hopeful. So thank you again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing everyone in our next workshop.